Okay, everybody, so now we are back here and we're going to finish off the Sinhalese Kingdoms and get into the successor states, if you will, to Anora Hapura and talk about some economics and a whole bunch of different stuff. So let's just jump right into it. This will be a little bit longer. So the next empire that is established is the Polonnaruwa period, which was established in the year 1070 by this man Vijayabahu, who leads a revolt from Polonnaruwa. There we go. Man, that's a tough one. Against the Chola kingdom, who I'd mentioned before, who caused some issues with the previous empire. And once he gets himself established, he will expand his empire to cover a good chunk of the island. And actually, at one point, they even control a little bit of land over in Burma. They don't hold it for that long, but at least that shows a little bit of a scope here because, that's over 1,000 miles away over the sea. They don't last terribly long. They fall apart around the 1220s. And governments here, once again, these kings rule everything. In a lot of ways, they were like Brahmins, but in this case, they're practicing Buddhists. And their job is to actually uphold Buddhist institutions, lots of temple and monastery buildings. And then monasteries also kind of became centers of learning and education in Sri Lanka. And here is the example of a temple that is surviving today. Now, the society is very interesting. They do have a caste system, and yes, we understand that Buddhism doesn't have a caste system, but this was still something that was brought over, and again that Indo-Aryan migration. And in this case, you have a bit of a caste system for jobs, but it wasn't quite as rigid. Okay, you have a group of people at the top that were called the Govi, and they were cultivators and landowners. And most of the top castes were actually associated with agriculture, in some cases, government jobs as well. And most of these were relatives of the king. Okay. The further divisions of the castes were given non agricultural jobs, and they were also segregated in different sections of the cities. Right. But I have a rising. You could actually rise through the ranks here if you are qualified or did something really good and was noticed. You could actually be elevated. So it wasn't that thing like, hey, you did an awesome job, but you're still this caste, so blah. In this case, you do actually see some social mobility in Sri Lanka, which was a little bit different. So some of these jobs are, yes, based on heredity, but you can rise up and change your family's fortune within your lifetime. You don't have to wait for reincarnation or anything along that line. Um, Agriculture and water, super important. They particularly in Sri Lanka, you have some of the most revolutionary irrigation techniques in the entire world, because they did a lot of wet farming with things like rice. They were able to create dams, reservoirs, canals, and underground pipeline to deliver water to fields and cities. For instance, their largest storage tank for water covered more than 5,000 acres and could actually irrigate 18,000 acres. And this, of course, requires high levels of organization, and as a result, you have a strong centralized government. And subsequent empires that would rise up on the island, or kingdoms, I should say, not empires as much, kingdoms would continue this need for the water for the agriculture. So really, really impressive. All right. Now, after these guys, we have a variety of other kingdoms here, and I'm just showing you kind of where some of these kingdoms were. We have Jaffna, Dambandina, or Dambadania, Gampola, Kote, or Kote, I think it's Kote, Sitawaka, and Kandy. And again, it's city-state-ish. It's still based out of the city, so they take the names after their cities, but they still control much larger amounts of land than just like your standard city-state, if you will. Okay. All right. Now, also during this time period, from 1232 to 1505, with this variety of kingdoms, as I mentioned there before, you do have a new group of people called the Tamils that migrate over. They are typically Hindus or Christians. This has and they do set up in the north, mainly around the city of Jaffna. And actually, the kingdom of Jaffna, as I look up here, right, Jaffna, and some of their tributary areas, this was established by the Tamils, okay? And the Wani were also some Christians, so you do have a Christian presence on this island. And again, the bulk is still Buddhist, and you do have some Hindus as well. And again, the Tamils really represent that. They will create their own kingdoms in the north, as I said, by Jaffna, but for the most part, they're actually geographically isolated. Okay, they stay in the north. There's some geographic features, mountainous areas and some drier areas, which kind of keeps the north separate from everything else. So as a result, the Tamils kind of are on their own. But again, because of religious background and ethnic backgrounds, the Tamils have been persecuted people. We'll talk about in the future, there are some examples of genocide that occur in this area against the Tamils, and we'll get to that. But that is a different ethnic group that does come over during this time period as well. So you do have the Sinhalese as well as the Tamils. Now, eventually, the divided nature of the island does make it susceptible to outside invasions. In the 15th century, Vijayanagar would invade and for a while actually make Jaffna its tributary. Zheng He, the great admiral from China, who we will be talking about a little bit later, he will come in and actually conquer some of the island, and he actually captures one of the kings for a little while and takes him back to China. And over time, issues came up with the irrigation systems. At some point, it seems like people kind of forgot how to operate them on certain parts of the island, and as a result, most of the north became depopulated and people moved to the south. So you got a bit of a geographical switch there, and you do have war. Like there's lots of war with these different things, and this goes back to the irrigation again, which is really crucial in Sri Lanka because the rain is a bit uneven, and again, it can be very dry here, very hot here, so you need that really good irrigation. So you're going to go to war over these types of resources, and when groups went to war, they often would attack each other's irrigation systems, which makes sense during time of war, but nonetheless causes long-term problems. Trade was really where it's at. I have a picture there on the left. That is Colombo in South Africa, in Sri Lanka. So that's really, really important. They are right in the middle of the Indian Ocean, so it is a perfect place. Their key exports are gems and ivory, and also spices, particularly cinnamon, which, fun fact, is ground up bark of a tree. So you can have the powder, that's fine, but don't eat cinnamon sticks. It's bark. It won't work out well for you. Kings would often enter into contracts with foreign merchants from the various kingdoms. Prices would always be fixed, and again, everything is controlled by the royal families. The biggest and most important ports were the cities of Colombo and Gaul. Almost all merchants were actually foreign, so they would set up little colonies around these cities. The most common traders were Arabs at this time, and trade was actually so widespread and successful that in 1283, one Sinhalese king was actually able to send an embassy to the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt to create a commercial agreement. And really, you'll also see the introduction of new crops here to take advantage of the environment. So coconuts, for instance, I use a great example, they are not native to Sri Lanka, but they are brought in because the climate is there and people really like coconuts. Okay, I had coconut water today in a smoothie because it's fantastic. And so you really, really see, trade is the key thing here, as always. Buddhism is going to be very important. Over time, you see it go in a little bit of decline as this time goes on, mainly because of the influx of Hindus, particularly when the Tamils came over. And as time went on, the monkhood became a little bit harder to sustain, and in some cases kind of got corrupted because they felt like the kings didn't feel like the monks were good enough. The Tamils also influence a little bit, and there's some intermarriage. So you see the worshiping of some Vedic gods, as well as some Hindu deities, as well as the celebration of Hindu festivals. Now, in the long run, Buddhism will prevail. Today, over 70% of the population still worship it, but it was much higher than that initially. Like when we had our first kingdoms that got established pre the Common Era, you had pretty much all Buddhism, and then other religions, Hinduism most predominantly, some Christianity as well. So during the second wave of kingdoms, like from the mid 1200s to the 1500s, you do see a little bit of a drop in Buddhism for a while until eventually it comes back. This is one of the more famous statues in Sri Lanka, the sleeping Buddha, and here you have your monks that are praying in front of it. Eventually, they are going to fall, and really, it's European imperialism. First, it's the Portuguese who also go after the Buddhists really hard. Then it's the Dutch. Then finally, the British will conquer and control the island for quite a while. But again, the Sinhalese, very different group of people. Again, part of the South Asia stuff that a lot of people don't know about. So hopefully you learned a little bit of something, and I'll see you guys soon.